The early 1980s were a transformative period for the video game industry, marked by rapid technological advancements and an expanding market for home computers. And whilst our American cousins were focused almost entirely on video game consoles, such as the Atari VCS, UK gamers were playing games on their BBC Micro, Commodore 64 and of course our ZX Spectrum home computers. Yes, the ZX Spectrum, with its affordable price and cheap cassette-based games, became a popular platform for development. And soon developers began to unlock the full potential of the little rubber button machine. And at the head of this movement were the company Ashby Computers and Graphics Limited, trading as Ultimate Play the Game, which was founded in 1982 by ex-arcade video game developers Tim and Chris Stamper. Now, okay, there's certainly been a few videos on YouTube covering the story of Ultimate Play the Game and the Stamper brothers. I mean, they were brilliant, and certainly everybody knows that they didn't only set up Ultimate Play the Game, but they also founded Rare. It's certainly a fascinating story, and the games that came out of this development house were just simply brilliant. So why not? Let's get started. Born in 1958, Chris Stamper discovered computers while studying physics and electronics at Loughborough University of Technology. Clever guy this Chris Stamper. I mean, he built an oscilloscope in his youth. What's that I hear you say? Well, it's basically a type of electronic test instrument that graphically displays varying voltages of one or more signals as a function of time. Their main purpose is capturing information on the electronic signals for debugging, analysis or characterization. See, clever fella, but it doesn't stop there. While at university, he also built a kit computer with an 8-bit processor built around an RCA 1802 microprocessor. And learning to program it, well, this comfort with the hardware and software would be key to his career. Chris then made the decision to leave the university in 1981 to pursue computer programming full time. Was this a wise move? It certainly was. And by 1979, he managed to get a job at Associate Leisure, a new British firm set up not only to import Japanese and American arcade machines into the country, but to continue to support the needs of the arcade owners who purchased them once they arrived. And in that spirit, Chris spent much of his time working up conversion kits, which would allow an owner to, say, convert a Space Invaders machine into a Galaxy machine when the former started getting long in the tooth. And it was also at this point he found a job for his less technical little brother Tim Stamper in graphics and design, and he became firm friends with John Lathbury, another coder and hardware engineer. Now, their manager at Associate was a fella named Norman Parker. Realising the talent he had working under him, he convinced them all to leave Associate with him for a new venture, a company called Xylic Electronics, which would become one of just 2 British companies to manufacture and sell original arcade games. They became his secret weapons, engineering and programming games that were sold in Britain under the Xylic name or licensed to big Japanese companies like Konami and Sega. They worked on a total of 12 arcade games whose names were kept secret, and I have to say, it took some research to try find out some solid detail here. One of the earliest Xylic games was Vortex, and various Spectrum forums suggest the names of John Lathbury and Chris Stamper appear in the ROM code. And this Vortex is a bit of a crummy Asteroids knockoff with choppy gameplay, lackluster graphics and strange controls that require you to hold the fire button to thrust. It's not the best game. Another earlier credited source for the Stampers was in the 1982's arcade game The Pit, though research suggests that they were not the original designers of the game, but they were involved with it. In this game, well, it kind of resembles Boulder Dash. Digging and boulder dropping might have been seen before in Dig Dug and Mr. Do, In those games, dirt and rocks are tools for destroying your enemies. Here, navigating the terrain and grabbing the diamonds is your ultimate goal, and the boulders are obstacles to impede your path. There are enemies, but they mostly wander aimlessly. You can win without collecting all the gems, but if you're going for a high score, it's pretty much required. Collecting 6 will double your bonus, but collecting all 7 will triple it. The pit, whether the Stampers had anything to do with it or not, is pretty fun. There's almost an Indiana Jones-like feel in places, especially the main gem room, where distributing the treasure activates a deadly arrow trap. But I have to say, the controls are horribly twitchy. Oftentimes you've got to dig a space with absolutely perfect pixel precision, and while sometimes you can bump against impassable terrain features to align yourself, this isn't always a possibility. The worst example of this is this single tile bottleneck passage above the acid pit, which you must exit through to return to your ship, and at the moment you enter this room the floor begins to drop under your feet, giving you no time at all to adjust your position to the precise pixel alignment necessary. And also turning around to shoot a pursuing enemy is risky, as you're likely to just fumble into his deadly grasp. To be fair though, the pit is otherwise a rather easy game. There's only one level with only 2 possible boulder layouts and everything is pretty deterministic. Still, it's frustrating when virtually every death feels like the fault of the controls. Also, can I just say, I find the death animations in this game oddly horrific. Now, one of the arcade games that we do know that the Stamper Brothers were working on was Konami's Garus. This game was basically a shoot 'em up. The gameplay is similar to that of Galaga in a tube shooter format, where the player's ship facing into the screen and able to move around the perimeter of an implicit circle. Stars come into view at the centre of the screen and fly outward, giving the impression of the player's ship moving through space. The Stampers made a big deal of their time in the arcade industry, and with good reason. I mean, the experience they gained was invaluable. For one thing, the games they made were all built around the Zilog Z20, the chip also at the heart of the Sinclair Spectrum. Chris and John had every opcode and register permanently etched into their brains long before they saw their first Specky. But just as important were the personal contacts they made. Barely out of their teens, they got to travel the world. I mean, they saw all the best products from all around the world. They certainly learned their trade very well. They learned the delicate feint and parry of Japanese business decorum, and they forged a bond with a man from Florida called Joel Hochberg, who had been in coin-operated entertainment since the days when that meant pinball machines. He had helped the young Nolan Bushnell launch the original Pong. So the Stamper Brothers, they really did mix with high people that influenced the video game industry. Such valuable experience to have. Parker mentioned that they are completely down to earth about games. They know what a game has to do to make money, and in the arcades, a game has to make money immediately or it will almost literally be scrapped. They learnt this important lesson from the arcade business. Nice compliment. Having worked on arcade games for over 2 years for Associate Leisure and Xylic Electronics, where they've come into contact with Japanese game companies, the brothers were already old hands in the booming world of video games, and with the arcade industry beginning to go soft and British microcomputers sweeping the country, the Stamper Brothers and Lathbury decided to bail on Xylic and start their own company to cater to the new market. And in 1982, they founded Ashby Computers and Graphics, or ACG for short, which was based in the Leicestershire town of Ashby de la Zouch. Carol Ward, Tim's girlfriend at the time, also came in as another graphic designer and also the company's secretary. And I also believe that Tim married Carol in 1985. And they worked out of a 4-room terraced house next door to the brothers' family corner shop and ran on a shoestring budget for the first 6 months, in which they pooled their money to pay the bills. The company did not credit individuals on their releases, though they had individual roles in the development. Chris and John Lathbury programmed and Tim and Carol designed the graphics. Now, Ultimate Play the Game, as the company was publicly known, first licensed arcade cabinet conversion kits to companies before moving to the more profitable British home computer market. ACG released 4 arcade games, a blueprint for Bally Midway, Grasspin, Dingo and Saturn for the Jayloco. So let's have a look at these 4 arcade games. Okay, so Blueprint is an arcade maze game released in September 1982. It was developed by the Stamper Brothers at Xylic Electronics and licensed to Bally Midway. And the game goes as follows. Your girlfriend Daisy is in trouble. Ollie Org is chasing her across the top of the screen and you need to come to the rescue. To stop Ollie before time runs out, you need to construct a machine. The blueprint for the machine is at the bottom of the screen, so all you need to do is locate the parts which are hidden in the numerous houses in a maze-like town. When you locate your part, drag it back and place it on the blueprint. And when all parts have been located, press the start button and the machine is ready to go. To make your task more difficult, there are several obstacles that get in your way. If you enter a house which doesn't contain a part, you will instead be stuck with a bomb. Therefore, you will need to hurry and defuse any bombs in the bomb pit before they explode. From time to time, a flower pot will fall from above and then hop off the screen. Get hit by a flower pot and you lose a life. You also need to be careful of Fuzzy Wuzzy, who wanders around the neighbourhood randomly. An encounter with Fuzzy Wuzzy will also be deadly. Hiding in the bomb pit is Sneaky Pete. While he isn't deadly, he will occasionally appear and press the start button before your machine is complete. And if this happens, you will need to drag Pete back to the bomb pit and reassemble all the machine parts. Let's have a little look. Alright, now we're on the Saturn, which is basically a 1 or 2 player shooter game developed by Xylic in 1983. Let's have a look. Now we're on to Dingo. Big Ted the koala is so fond of fruit that he has cultivated an enormous melon patch in the jungle. But, unfortunately, the patch has been invaded by a pack of evil dingoes that love nothing more than stomping on poor Ted's melons and creating a lot of havoc in the process. Therefore, Big Ted has to harvest the fruit as fast as he can to save him from these dingoes. And then the last one, Graspin, which was released in Japan in 1983. This is basically a maze game where you can push walls to change the layout of the maze between vertical and horizontal corridors. The aim of the game is to collect all the lettered flags before the chasing enemies can catch you. There's also life preservers available, which are really ammunition for a quick getaway. Red walls will also start appearing on higher mazes, and these will lose you a life if you push them. Now, as you can see, Graspin has a screen that scrolls slightly to the left and to the right to reveal a river on either side of the maze. If you have a life preserver in your possession, you can jump into the rivers and float downstream to escape anything chasing you, which is really a neat touch. You gotta beware though, because if there's an enemy at the bottom of the river waiting for you, then it's not a good idea to jump in. And as these levels increase, the enemies begin to follow you more closely, and it becomes quite easy to scupper yourself by pushing walls at the wrong time, or by even trapping yourself into a corner with an enemy hovering just outside, in which case you're basically doomed. And while Graspin is not particularly original, it's similar in many ways to the 1981 arcade game Ladybug. It is at least challenging and fun for a short while. And when you get your head around what to do, it's possible to employ strategies to trap enemies and stop them from catching you. Unlike the other ACG arcade games that we talked about, Graspin is a very simple game and doesn't have very much variety. And if you don't expect too much from it, you might just as well enjoy the game. Okay, now this is where things start to get very interesting. The brothers primarily developed for the ZX Spectrum, given Chris's expertise with its Z80 processor. Ultimate certainly developed games in a way very different from the typical specky bedroom coders. As with so much else about Ultimate, details of their development system are not entirely clear, But those early interviews do describe it as a 32-bit multi-user system on which they could write and compile their code and ship it over to an attached Spectrum for execution. A best guess would be it's a 68,000 base Unix workstation. The methodology obviously borrowed heavily from that used by Xylic and their competitors for writing arcade firmware and cost several £1,000s. They chose the Spectrum, it's a low-end model with just 16k of memory as their target platform for reasons purely economic, to finance the cost of the development system and to provide revenue quickly. They needed a big selling computer, and the 16k Spectrum fit the bill. Jetpack was Ultimate's first release in May 1983 for the ZX Spectrum. And I have to say, I was actually quite surprised that this was a 16k game and not actually a 48k game. Tim Stamper said that they deliberately targeted 16k machines as the smaller size meant development time was much shorter, claiming they could produce two 16k games in 1 month, as opposed to one 48k game. Now the game follows Jetman as he must rebuild his rocket in order to explore different planets, while simultaneously defending against hostile aliens. Build a spaceship, fill it with fuel, then blast off to the next planet. Simple really. And after the first level, the rocket stays assembled and just requires refueling. In the game, the enemies do change forms from each level, cycling back to the first after 8 levels, and each alien has a different pattern of movement, which means that they can be dealt with in a different manner. Now, Jetpack sold 300,000 copies for the ZX Spectrum and generated £1 million sterling in revenue for Ultimate Play the game, which enabled the Stamper Brothers to gain a foothold in the early video gaming market. The game was critically acclaimed by many of the computer magazines. And the game, well, it reached number 1 in the first Spectrum sales chart, published by CVG. The game was also voted number 73 in Your Sinclair Reader's Top 100 Games of All Time in 1993, and was also voted the 14th best game of all time by the readers of Retro Gamer for an article that was scheduled to be in a special Your Sinclair tribute issue. And also the game won the title Game of the Year at the 1983 Golden Joystick Awards. Excellent. Now, Jetpack was followed by a further 3 16k releases in 1983. And these 3 games, they were Pissed, Trans Am and Cookie. Let's have a look at the first game, Pissed. So this game is a single screen game. The plant grows from a plant pot at the bottom centre of the screen, and the spray cans containing 3 different pesticides are located on edges on each side of the screen. Bonus items such as fertiliser and spades appear on unoccupied ledges, which will increase both the player's score and the plant's growth rate. However, as the alien insects also appear from the ledges, and the bonus items can only be collected if Robbie is not holding a can of pesticide, it is a risk to collect them. There are 3 types of alien insect and 3 types of pesticide, which will kill either, stun, or have no effect on the insects. Now, Robbie can only carry 1 type of pesticide at a time, and in the early stages of the game, the kill pesticide can be carried at all times. However, later stages have more than 1 type of insect on screen at once, making the choice of pesticide more tactical. And as the plant grows, it will sprout leaves, which increase the growth rate, yet also make it more vulnerable to insects. And once the plant reaches a predetermined height, it flowers and the player moves to the next level. When the insects make contact with a plant, they will stick to it, making it shrink until it dies. And if the plant shrinks beyond the section where the insect is attached, the insect is released, but it may immediately reattach lower down, depending on its movement path. A life is lost if the plant dies or if Robbie makes contact with an insect, and the death graphic for both Robbie and the insects is the same as the enemy explosion used in Jetpack. Trans Am was one of the very few Spectrum games which was also available in ROM format for use with the interface too. The game involves driving around a post-apocalyptic America, collecting 8 trophies, avoiding natural hazards and kamikaze cars which attempt to crash into the player. The player has a limited supply of fuel which must be topped up by driving over petrol pumps. Let's have a look at the game. Now we're on to Cookie, which was released in 1983. Charlie, the chef, keeps all the ingredients locked away in the pantry, only letting them out when he wants to cook them. Now this makes them jolly upset, let me tell you. So, as soon as they can, the ingredients dash out of the pantry, dragging all the sorts of nasties found in the bottom of drawers and cupboards with them to escape and run wild. Poor old Charlie, he has to daze the ingredients with his flour bombs and knock them into the mixing bowl, because if they go into the dustbins they will be eaten by the bin monster, who doesn't care one little bit whether he throws any rubbish. And should any rubbish or nasties get into the cake mix, then the ingredients needed counter will change, and Charlie will have to work quicker and faster if he's going to bake his cake. Now, those early titles are fast-paced, colourful and smartly designed, and pack a staggering amount of content into these 16K games. They really did seem to transform the spec into a whole new machine, which no one had ever suspected that had it within it, and which no one but Ultimate knew how to access. While gameplay remains firmly in the 3 lives, ever more difficult levels mode of the arcade, the concepts are not only original but really gratifying, having you build things rather than just blowing them up. And as we just saw in Pest, you're a gardener trying to grow a flower and protect it from the rampaging insects. In Cookie, you're a baker trying to make a cake, Swedish chef style, with animated ingredients that don't want to be baked. And from all this, the gamers responded. Ultimate was soon rewarded with the biggest overall sales in the industry, and the beginnings of an incomparable reputation they still enjoy today. By the year's end, their games sat at number 1, number 3 and number 4 on the computer and video game Spectrum sales top 10, and they had retreated into their offices protected by thick perspex windows, an entry phone to ward off casual knockers and a private keep out signs on the garage at the rear that would soon hold a Lamborghini or two. Now, much of Ultimate's mystique is down to their elusiveness. The Stampers were reticent with the press and only rarely gave interviews. When they debuted their first games in 1983, they did the usual dance, inviting the press out to their modest office in the Midlands town of Ashley de la Zouch for interviews. Little did anyone realise that those first 2 interviews given that summer to Home Computing Weekly and Popular Computing Weekly would also be the last. At first, so the partners claimed, they were simply just too busy writing and selling games to deal with the press, but it couldn't have taken them long to realise that their silence only intensified gamers' fascination. It was the best kind of promotion, the kind which costs nothing and for which you have to do nothing. And this veil of secrecy has never really lifted. You don't need 2 hands to count the total number of sit-down interviews given by the Stampers in the last 30 years. They also explained that this was both to protect their own time and due to their preference to let the games speak for themselves. And their brand certainly benefited from this mystique of secrecy. The Stampers were also known for working 18-hour days and believed that part-time work resulted in a part-time game. I mean, they only took 2 days off, and that was 2 Christmas mornings. And with regards to Tim Stamper's custom-built Lamborghini, well, this was a token of his hard work, and do you know what? Well deserved. Now, the games that would really make Ultimate legendary would come from the next batch, for which they stepped up to the 48K Spectrum, the one that almost everyone was actually buying by now. And Ultimate's first 48K releases were Lunar Jetman, a sequel to Jetpack, and Attic Attack, both of which were released in late 1983. Both games were very well received by the gaming press, Crash Magazine in particular praising what Ultimate had managed to do with the extra memory Lunar Jetman used. So, the first of these bigger 48 games was Lunar Jetman, released for the Sinclair ZX Spectrum in 1983 and also the BBC Micro in 1984. This sequel to Jetpack was certainly a more complex play and a vastly larger area, but still with the standard arcade structure of level after level, each more difficult than the previous, unfolding until you die. And in this game, Jetman has to destroy alien bases, while simultaneously defending himself along with Earth from a hostile alien race. Attic Attack is presented in a top-down perspective and is set inside a complex labyrinth castle with multiple floors and secret passages. The player has been trapped inside and needs to collect 3 pieces of the golden key of ACG in order to escape. In the game, you can choose 3 different characters: a wizard, knight or serf. Each character has different ground friction, a different weapon to kill common enemies, and access to a secret passage unique to them, meaning that navigating the castle is different for each one. Now, the castle setting of Attic Attack was spread over 5 floors, including subterranean dungeons and the haunted attic of the title, and was riddled with secret passages that had to be learned in order to progress. There are a number of items scattered around the castle, of which the player may carry up to 3 at a time. Some of these are always in the same place at the start of the game, whereas others are distributed randomly. Items include differently coloured keys which will unlock their respective doors. The 3 pieces of the ACG key and other items that affect certain enemies are mere red herrings. Common enemies appear in each room upon entering and will attack the player on sight. Collision with these enemies destroys them but drains a portion of the player's health, so you need to be careful. And there are also stationary poisonous fungi, which will drain health constantly if the player is in contact with them, and enemies that require special items in order to either distract, repel or kill them, otherwise they remain in the room, invulnerable to conventional attacks and rapidly drain the player's health if touched. In the game, you have 3 lives upon starting the game, and should they die, a gravestone will appear at their location and stay in place for the remainder of the current game. I quite like that feature. Health can be replenished by collecting food scattered throughout the castle, however, it will constantly drop the more the player moves. Thus, the player may eventually lose a life from starvation if they have not escaped the castle in time. I have to say, this Attic Attack was quite a punishing game. For its time, Attic Attack's visuals and graphics were impressive, leveraging the ZX Spectrum's limited capabilities effectively. I mean, these colourful sprite designs and detailed rooms created an immersive atmosphere that drew players into the game world, making the most of the extra memory afforded by the 48K Spectrum. I also like the fact that the visual design of Attic Attack maintained a consistent medieval theme, enhancing the game's story and charm. The distinctive look of each character and enemy contributed to the game's overall appeal also. While the ZX Spectrum was not known for its advanced sound capability, Attic Attack made good use of available resources. The sound effects, though simple, were effective in enhancing the gameplay experience and providing audio cues for player actions. This game is also known for its initial challenging gameplay. Players must navigate a complex maze, manage limited resources and contend with numerous enemies. The difficulty curve is steep, but it does reward persistence and strategic thinking. And several factors contributed to Attic Attack's high replayability. The randomised elements such as item placement and enemy behaviour ensure that each playthrough is unique. Additionally, the different experiences offered by the 3 character classes encourage multiple playthroughs. Ultimately, with practice, the game could be completed in around 3 minutes. I have to say though, that didn't happen for me. Now, upon its release in 1983, Attic Attack was met with widespread acclaim. It entered the MRIB Top 30 software charts at number 5 in November 1983, taking the number 1 position from Valhalla the following fortnight. It was also voted the 8th best game of all time by the readers of Retro Gamer magazine for an article that was scheduled to be in a special Your Sinclair tribute issue. This is definitely one of my favourite games. I mean, the size and scale of Attic Attack, combined with the smooth graphics and the spooky theme, it just felt like nothing that had come before on a home computer. It may seem quaint now, but at the time it was groundbreaking and a sign of greater things to come for UK gamers. The game was also a major inspiration for the critically acclaimed CITV game show Nightmare, which is a British children's adventure game show created by Tim Child and broadcast over 8 series on CITV from 1987 to 1994. The general format of the show consists of a team of 4 children, one who takes on the game and 3 acting as their guide and an advisors, attempting to complete a quest within a fantasy medieval environment, traversing a large dungeon and using their wits to overcome puzzles, obstacles and the unusual characters they meet along the journey. In 1984 came Sabre Wolf, the first in the Saberman series and the first release at a recommended retail price of £9.95. The price of Ultimate titles had previously been just £5.50, which was typically for Spectrum arcade style games at the time. This increase was to discourage piracy, with the idea being that if customers paid more for a game, they would be less inclined to give away copies. This coincided with the introduction of the distinctive Ultimate Big Box packaging, which the company felt might also help justify the price increase and encourage gamers to buy the game rather than copy it. And I have to say the strategy paid off as Sabre Wolf went on to sell over 350,000 copies on the Spectrum alone. Now, Ultimate reached their pinnacle of success at the end of 1984, when they released Underworld and Nightlore simultaneously, just in time for Christmas. The former was a continuation of what they already wrought in the Attic Attack and Sabre Wolf, but the latter marked the last big innovation they would give to their eager public, the first isometric action adventure. So Underworld is Saberman's second game, which finds him trapped in an underground cavern network, split into nearly 600 side-viewed screens. There are 3 ways to escape, each protected by a guardian, who can be killed using one of the 3 major weapons you can locate: a dagger, a torch, and a knife. As you explore the levels, you will encounter randomly moving nasties, who can't kill you but can knock you off your path and cause you to fall. There's also eagles which can grab and drop you in mid-air, so you need to be careful. And any falls of much more than a screen's height can cost you a life, although extra ones are available. Jewels can be collected by temporary invincibility, and the game's screens are functionally split into castle and caverns, with the castle screens higher up. Moving across the castles involves a lot of blind jumps, often deliberately bouncing off fortuitously placed objects such as flower pots. And in the caverns you use a rope to hook onto the ceilings and move up and down if you have found it. And how many screens deep you are in is also noted on the screen at all times. Now, Nightlore was something of a revolution in the home computer game market, using a forced perspective isometric viewpoint branded Filmation, the style of which would be extensively copied in other games, notable examples being Batman and Head Over Heels from Ocean Software. In a 1988 interview with Crash, Tim Stamper claimed that Nightlore and some of its Filmation follow-up Alien 8 was actually completed before Sabre Wolf, but Ultimate decided that it could have a potentially negative effect on sales of the comparatively primitive Sabre Wolf, so it was postponed until late 1984. In the game, our hero must reach Melkor, a somewhat eccentric wizard who is the only one who can save him. As with most Ultimate titles of the day, reaching them is a long and treacherous challenge, involving both puzzle solving and action, meaning that each screen requires thorough planning and precise navigation. And as I already mentioned, the game uses this isometric viewpoint, using monochrome but detailed graphics and techniques to avoid flickering sprites. The game, it lasts for 40 days and nights. At night your character turns into a werewolf. Ultimate's individual style of straightforward instructions in favour of feature lists and riddles is put to good use here, with the story detailed in a rhyming poem of sorts. Alright, so now we're on to the Staff of Karnath. And this game is an action-adventure video game, developed and published for the Commodore 64, originally in 1984, and in the United States in 1985. The game is the first installment of the Pendragon series, and it's the first to feature the aristocrat adventurer, Sir Arthur Pendragon. And in the game, Sir Pendragon is tasked with searching a castle for the ancient Staff of Karnath, which he must destroy prior to midnight before it wipes out the human race. Now we're on to Alien 8, which again is an isometric action-adventure video game, which was released for the ZX Spectrum, the BBC microcomputer, Amstrad CPC and the MSX in 1985. In this game, it was written by Chris Stamper and the graphics were designed by Tim Stamper. This is a puzzle-solving game. You are on board a spaceship that is heading towards a remote planet. The Cryonauts, the name of the planet's inhabitants, have been frozen during the journey. And you have to find 24 valves and the cryogenic chambers that they are to be plugged into before the ship reaches its destination. The ship, it contains many rooms filled with obstacles that you have to negotiate. And there are several types of enemies, such as the Dalek-like mice and the clockwork mice. Both must be avoided. You might need a valve to climb over some walls also. Entombed is an action-adventure video game also published for the Commodore 64 in 1985. It is the second installment of the Pendragon series and it is a sequel to the Staff of Karnath. And again, the game features series protagonist and aristocrat adventurer Sir Arthur Pendragon as he attempts to escape an ancient Egyptian tomb before all oxygen runs out. And as with its predecessor, Entombed is presented in an isometric format. The game was created and designed by brothers Dave and Bob Thomas, with Ultimate founders Tim and Chris Stamper otherwise being uninvolved in the development of this game. Entombed took considerably longer to develop due to the reprogramming of its original game engine. The game received positive reviews from critics upon release, with praise being directed at its playability and graphics. And then there was a sequel, Black Witch, which was released later in the year. Again, this game is presented in an isometric format and is set on board a haunted galleon named the Black Witch. Sir Arthur Pendragon's main objective is to free the soul of its former captain, Richard Cavendish. Now, Pendragon can utilise various weapons, such as knives, daggers and a magic sword to defend himself from the enemy skeletons. The player begins the game with full energy, and it will slightly deplete every time the player is hit by an enemy. And if Pendragon completely runs out of energy, a large skeletal hand will drag the player off screen, thus killing them. Nice touch. Various segments of maps are scattered around the galleon, which will form a complete view of the game's overworld once all the segments are picked up. Other scattered items in the game include keys for locked doors, gunpowder to fire cannons, and pieces of jewellery, the latter having no additional use other than adding to the player's score. Right, now we're on to 1985's Gunfight. The player takes the part of the meanest and fastest gun-toting bunch of rootin' gunslingers, whichever did hit the Wild West, Sheriff Quick Draw. In the beginning of the game, in a first-person view, the player has to be quick on the draw to shoot bags of money that fall down the screen to collect a bounty that will be used to buy supplies and cover possible fines during the game. The main game then takes place in an isometric scrolling playfield that is similar to previous Ultimate Filmation titles. The objective is to collect a bounty by finding and eliminating wanted criminals that are harassing the town. And in the game, innocent bystanders will point to the direction of the criminal. Shooting them will result in a fine reducing your score, so don't do that. A horse can also be obtained to speed up the chase. Once the wanted criminal is encountered, the game again switches to a first-person crosshair view, where the first to draw will be the winner. Taking out the criminal will give you a reward that helps you with future expeditions, as the cost of ammo and horses changes as the game goes on. And your final tally will become your score at the game's end. Now we're on to the 1985 game Imhotep. Life as a pharaoh for Zoser has been a prosperous and peaceful time in Egypt, until his 10th year a great famine has swept the land, causing hardship and death for his loyal subjects. Years have passed with still no solution to the problem, and now his subjects who worshipped him have lost patience and are now gathered outside his temple in Memphis. The pharaoh has turned to his wisest man, Imhotep, for help, but the only solution to be found is for the wise man to find the princess with the sacred books called the Souls of Ra. Problem is her location is only known to the god of wisdom, Thoth, and to reach him to ask for directions in his land called Thebes, Imhotep must cross the lands of the Jawi nomads, which are hostile and heavily armed. You play the role of Imhotep as you attempt to cross the hostile lands before finding the location of Thoth and finally the princess over a number of levels. You start the game on a bird flying over the landscape, which is a horizontally side view scrolling shooter, as you avoid or shoot nomads on birds as well. After a certain distance of flying, you must now disembark your bird and carry on across the landscape on foot. And if you survive the hostile land, you now play various single-screen platform games with various floors connected by ladders and stairs. Now we're on to Nightshade, again another 1985 game. Between the seas of the Seven Islands and the Purple Mountains lies a valley. Time was that this area was safe and hospitable, however darkness then came, killing many of the inhabitants and warping the minds of the others. Many have gone there, none have returned. Can you be the first? Let's find out. Nightshade is an arcade adventure in scrolling isometric 3D with directional or rotational controls. You can take 3 hits from the various Roman monsters, turn from white to yellow to green as you take them, but a 4th costs you 1 of your 5 lives. Objects can be thrown at these foes, but only if you have any. There are 4 supervillains to destroy: a Mad Monk, a Skeleton, a Ghost, and Mr. Grim Reaper. And you must find the right objects to do this. Right, this is the 1985 game Outlaws. Many years ago rode a band of men. They came from the east of the desert and with them brought terror and destruction. Nobody was safe from the perils of a merciless death. No family was complete, no man was free. They were the Outlaws. Driven only by murderous ambition and selfish greed, they scoured the land, leaving behind them a trail of death and pillage. Town after town they plundered, with no man left who could stop them and no man left alive who could dare try. The townsfolk lived at the mercy and prayed that the evil band of men's dark shadow of doom would not pass over their valley. Frightened though they were, they still found hope, and they prayed that one day someone would come and deliver them from the outlaws' evil tyranny. It's fair to say that 1985 was a strange but busy year for the Stamper Brothers. Ultimate starred dim somewhat during 1985, beginning as early as Alien 8, which prompted a few grumbles amidst the usual superlative reviews that it was just really night lore in space. By the time of Nightshade and Gunfight, a developing critical consensus had it that Ultimate was not only failing to advance their action-adventure formula, but actually beginning to regress, offering less interesting puzzles, less control and less to do. A handful of underwhelming Commodore 64 games done by outside contractors. This after Ultimate had sworn they would always do all of their games in-house, damaged their reputation even more. In truth, the divide in quality pre and post Night Lore was probably exaggerated. The British press had more than a whiff of the tabloid about it and generally delighted in tearing down heroes even more than it enjoyed building them up. Perhaps the Stamper Brothers did take their foot off the pedal in the Ultimate games. Perhaps there was something brewing behind the scenes. In fact, this was exactly what was happening. Following the success of the isometric filmation game engine behind titles like Night Lore, the Stampers found a separate company, Rare Designs of the Future, later shortened to Rare. During its early years, Rare was backed by a generous budget from Nintendo, primarily concentrated on Nintendo Entertainment System games. While Ultimate was built for the British home microcomputer market, Rare was founded with an eye toward the burgeoning Japanese video game console market, having been apprised of Nintendo by their Japanese arcade industry contracts. Nintendo initially rebuffed the brothers' interest in 1983, which led Chris Stamper to study the Nintendo Entertainment System hardware for 6 months. And with the consistent success of Ultimate's releases, there was also rumours of a buyout by Ocean, until it was announced in 1985 that the Stamper Brothers had sold a minority stake in the company to US Gold, who would continue to release games under the Ultimate label. Now, I will come back to Rare, as it's obviously a very important and successful chapter in the Stamper Brothers story, but before we get into that, let's continue with the Ultimate the Game chapter. 1986 and 1987 saw the release of 5 games, so let's start with Cyber Run. The planetary system called Ziberima is the only place in the universe where you can find cybernite, the hardest material known to man, and key to generating enormous power and wealth. To exploit the unique resources of the planets, a ship is constructed and sent to Ziberima. Now, this all boils down to a jetpack influenced game, where you fly your ship around a hostile planet, at first picking up pieces of your ship in order to make it fully functional, then finding resources. You have a laser gun and a plasma weapon at your disposal to fight the enemies which float around or are actively hunting you. The sky is also filled with dangers such as acid rain clouds, hovering lasers and meteor showers. The undulating terrain is equally dangerous. Dragon's Skull is the fourth and final game in Ultimate Play the Game's Commodore 64 exclusive Sir Arthur Pendragon's saga. And in this game, you are trying to search for the evil Skull of Souls. You begin in a small island where the evil skull has summoned many minions to eliminate you. You discover that many people have tried to obtain this skull. Their graves are inside the cave, and their life force may help you or try to kill you. The ultimate forces of chaos and darkness are gathering as they meet you in the cave. Following the events of Nightlore, where Saberman got himself rid of the curse of the werewolf, he has been tasked to find the ancient magic pentagram in the forest. Using his magic wand, Saberman must find the 4 parts of the pentagram and use the water from the magic wells to restore them. Once this is done, 5 magic runes must be discovered and placed on the pentagram to make it his. Pentagram is the final Saberman Filmation title by Ultimate Play the Game. The gameplay and the isometric graphics are very similar to Nightlore and Alien 8, with the addition that the Saberman can hurl magical projectiles at the denizens of the forest. The player must solve environmental puzzles to proceed and uncover objectives. After a long journey, robot ship Marcon Dawn is attacked by the Martianoids aliens, which disrupt the passage of programs, destroy active components in the ship's brain, and drain your battery in an attempt to destroy your ship. Therefore, your mission is to defend the Marcon brain from the infestation, using a defense droid that has to guide programs from a transmitter to a receiver to activate the ship's defences. When all 9 sectors are activated, the brain is safe. The droid is equipped with lasers as a weapon against enemies, and there is a console displaying messages and a map. The wizard tyrant Vadra has enslaved the inhabitants of the ancient city of Urkon and made them into immobile blobs. And to further strengthen his grip to the city, he has created giant bottles that spew magical bubbles that create mutant enemies that enforce his control. His former assistant Kintor has given you the ability to move and created magical corks that can be used to close the bottles to lessen Vadra's grip. Your task is to cork the bottles and overthrow the evil wizard. The player controls a blob or bubble that can roll, jump, use chutes and elevators to move around a 3D system of platforms, towers and slopes. Enemies can be shot with mini bubbles, crabs spawn from the generators and bubbles come from the bottles, 5 of which have to be corked on each level, allowing the player to exit it. Since the player bubble has no features, a directional gauge is used to determine the facing of the bubble to show movement direction. Now, although US Gold continued to release games under the Ultimate label, later titles such as Martianoids and Blubber were not seen by the gaming press as being up to Ultimate's previous high standards, and sales did fall as a result. And US Gold, well, they released no new Ultimate games after Blubber in 1987. A final Saberman game, Meyer Mayer, was trialled in early Saberman games and was mentioned by Sinclair user as being the next up for release, but was quietly dropped during development. And then, in late 1988, Rare bought back the rights sold to US Gold and were reported to be developing games again. Future releases were to have included Solar Jetman, which would eventually appear on the Nintendo Entertainment System, although home computer conversions for the Commodore 64, Amiga and Atari ST were completed by Storm Software, but were not released. And then finally, in 1988, Ultimate Play the Game, The Collected Works was released. This was a collection of 11 games, including Alien 8, Attic Attack, Cookie, Gunfight, Jetpack, Night Lore, Lunar Jetman, Nightshade, Pissed, Saberwolf and Trans Am. And the collection also came with a hint sheet and an interview with the Stamper brothers. Okay, now we're on to Rare. And as I already mentioned, in 1985, that was the year when the Stamper brothers founded a separate company, Rare Designs of the Future, later shortened to Rare. With an eye toward the mighty rise of the Japanese video game console market, and in particular the Nintendo Entertainment System, Nintendo certainly were interested in the Stamper brothers, with a proven track record on both arcade and home computer games. And as already mentioned, this led Chris Stamper to study the Nintendo Entertainment System hardware for a total of 6 months. The Famicom's manufacturer Nintendo claimed that it was impossible to reverse engineer the console. Using the information acquired from Rare, the team prepared several tech demos and showed them to a Nintendo executive in Kyoto. Impressed with their efforts, Nintendo decided to grant the Ultimate Play the Game team an unlimited budget for them to work on games for the Famicom platform. Wow, an unlimited budget, wow. And after they returned to England, they moved from Ashley de la Zouch to Twycross and established a new studio through Rare. They set their headquarters in Manor Farmhouse. Rare also set up another company called Rare Inc. in Miami, Florida. Headed up by Joel Hochberg, the American company was involved in maintaining Rare's operation in the US and contacting major US publishers. And Hochberg, well, he was previously the vice president of America arcade manufacturer Century. So this fella, he certainly knew what he was doing. And then the Famicom was eventually released in North America and Europe under the name Nintendo Entertainment System.
Nintendo Entertainment System. Now you're playing with power.
With the unlimited budget from Nintendo, Rare could work a large variety of different games. And the first project Rare worked on was Slalom, a downhill skiing game which sold 500,000 units and made the Stampers into Nintendo's first Western third-party developer. Now on the NES, Rare worked largely on licensed games and ports from other platforms for several publishers. The lucrative work was largely not innovative, but helped the Stampers learn the console's technology. The company worked with various publishers that included Tradewest, Acclaim Entertainment, Electronic Arts, Sega, Mindscape and GameTech to produce over 60 games for the NES and several additional Game Boy conversions. So let's have a look at some of these NES games. Rare's second NES game, Wizards and Warriors, is a platform game in which players control Kuros through the forest of Elrond to Castle Ironspire, where he must defeat Malkil and rescue the princess. RC Pro-Am is a racing video game in which a player races a radio-controlled car against 3 opponents around a track from an overhead isometric perspective. As one of Rare's first successful NES games, RC Pro-Am was well received for its visuals, sound, gameplay and enjoyability. Its overhead perspective distinguishes it from earlier first-person racing games. And the game, well, it earned its first million-selling hit for the NES. Now, Marble Madness was originally released in the arcades in December 1984. Beginning in 1986, the game was released for multiple platforms, with Rare porting the version to the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1989. California Games is a sports video game which again was ported over to the SNES by Rare. Okay, the third installment of the Jetman series. Our protagonist Jetman must manoeuvre his small craft through caverns of various planets while searching for pieces of the Golden Warship. The game is presented in a horizontal side view environment and has ranging gravitational pulls for each planet, which subjects Jetman's craft to various forms of inertia. Similar to its predecessors, Jetman must keep his craft topped up with fuel in order to progress through the levels. Rare also developed Battletoads, a beat-em-up inspired by the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles franchise. The game became known for its extreme difficulty, and upon seeing success, publisher Tradewest published multiple ports for the game and tasked Rare to develop sequels. Tradewest also gave their own Double Dragon license to Rare, allowing them to develop a crossover game between the two franchises. Rare released 3 Battletoad games in 1993, including Battletoads Double Dragon, The Ultimate Team, Battletoads in Ragnarok's World, and Battletoads in Battlemaniacs. And the last Battletoads game from that era was released for the arcade in 1994. Although there were several Battletoad games that were ported to the Sega systems like the Mega Drive and the Genesis. Now we're moving on to the Super Nintendo. And when the Super Nintendo Entertainment System was conceived, it's fair to say that Rare was not ready for the change. Rare limited their releases to some Battletoad games, and then decided to invest their significant NES profit in purchasing expensive Silicon Graphics workstations to make 3-dimensional models. This, however, was a clever move that made Rare the most technologically advanced developer in the UK, and situated them high in the international market. And it's also at this point that the priority changed, where the team decided to focus on quality instead of quantity. Excited about this work, Nintendo purchased a quarter stake in Rare, which eventually expanded to 49%, and offered their cast of characters to the company. The Stampers chose Donkey Kong, and the resulting Donkey Kong Country was immensely successful and a bestseller on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Donkey Kong Country was developed by a total of 20 people and enjoyed an 18-month development cycle. Rare staff also visited Twycross Zoo, observing and videotaping real gorillas. The game was a critical success, with critics praising the game's highly advanced visuals and art style. The game sold over 9 million copies worldwide, making it the 3rd best-selling game in the SNES library. The game also received several Game of the Year honours and was followed by 2 sequels, Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Kong Quest and Donkey Kong Country 3 Dixie's Kong's Double Trouble. And there was also several handheld spin-offs such as the Donkey Kong Land series. Now, we will get back to these 2 games, but first of all I wanted to have a look at Donkey Kong Country. So, Donkey Kong Country, it's a side-scrolling platform game. A reboot of the Donkey Kong franchise. Its story begins when King K. Rool and his army of crocodiles, the Kremlin, steal the Kong's banana hoard. The gorilla, Donkey Kong, and his nephew, Diddy Kong, set out to reclaim the Horde and defeat the Kremlins. Now, Donkey and Diddy serve as the player characters of the single-player game. They run alongside each other and the player can swap between them at will. Donkey is certainly the stronger of the two and can defeat enemies more easily. Diddy is faster and more agile. Both can walk, run, jump, pick up and throw objects and roll. Donkey can slap the terrain to defeat enemies or find items. Nintendo is usually highly protective of their intellectual properties, but was relatively uninvolved with Donkey Kong Country, leaving most of the work to Rare. Programmer Brendan Gunn noted that the Stampers worked to shield the team from outside influence. Now, Rare spent 18 months developing Donkey Kong Country from an initial concept to a finished game, and according to product manager Dan Olsen, 20 people worked on it in total. It cost an estimated $1 million to produce, and Rare said that it had the most man-hours ever invested in a video game at that time, 22 years. I mean, the team worked 12 to 16 hours every day of the week. Gunn said that the team was under significant pressure from the Stampers and to finish the game in time for Thanksgiving due to Nintendo's competition with Sega. Now, I have to say the Stamper brothers' work ethic hadn't really changed from Ultimate the game. Internally at Rare, the Stamper brothers were demanding bosses who continued to work 15 hours a day after transitioning into management roles. They simply stated that a 9-to-5 work ethic produces a 9-to-5 type game. Chris Stamper continued to code for the company through the mid-90s, while also serving as Rare's chairman and technical director. Tim, the managing director, continued to work on graphics for the company, including backgrounds in Donkey Kong Country. And there was also their younger brother Steven, who also worked as Rare's operations director. Now, these Stampers, they certainly encouraged competition between the company's development teams and were involved in the decision making of every game, even when the company expanded to several hundred employees. Rare's success continued with the Killer Instinct fighting game series. Nintendo's stake purchase allowed Rare to seriously expand. The number of staff members increased from 84 to 250, which resulted in them having to move out of their headquarters at the Manor farmhouse. The Stamper brothers also went back to their arcade roots, where they actually released Killer Instinct on a custom-built arcade machine. Nice. Now, Killer Instinct was originally meant to be released for the Nintendo 64 in 1995, but was actually forced to be released for the 16-bit SNES system, and as a result they had to downgrade the game's graphics. But Killer Instinct, well, it sold 3.2 million copies. Alright, now we're on to Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy Kong's Quest. So, in the game, the players control Diddy Kong and his girlfriend Dixie Kong, who must rescue Donkey Kong after he is kidnapped by King K. Rool. The game is set on Crocodile Island with 8 worlds of varying environments, totaling 52 levels. And as you can see, the game uses the same silicon graphics technology that was in the original, which features that beautiful use of pre-rendered 3D imagery. And similar to the first game, Diddy Kong's Quest received acclaim, being widely regarded as one of the greatest 2D platformers ever made. Praise was directed at its graphics, gameplay and soundtrack. And it was the second best-selling game of 1995 and the 6th best-selling game on the Super Nintendo. And here we go, here's Donkey Kong Country 3, Dixie Kong's Double Trouble. And in this game, the plot centres on Dixie Kong and her cousin Kiddy Kong in their attempts to save the captured Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong from the serious antagonist King K. Rool. The game is set in the Northern Cremisphere, a fictionalised version of Northern Europe and Canada. And again, the game received positive reviews upon release. Critics praised the visuals and various aspects of gameplay, but most were divided over the game's soundtrack. Then came Rare's finest hour. With the release of Nintendo 64, there was absolutely some brilliant games released in this system. Killer Instinct Gold, the console version of the Killer Instinct 2, it did suffer from graphical downgrade due to the compression technology used to fit the arcade version onto the smaller Nintendo 64 cartridge. Rare then developed Blast Corps for the Nintendo 64. The game sold 1 million copies, which was considered disappointed by Rare. Now, at that time, Rare was split into several teams, working on different projects. There was also a large-scale platformer, which was set to be released afterwards, but was delayed, and as a result, Rare changed their schedule and released their smaller projects first, and we'll come back to that large-scale platformer later. The first project released was GoldenEye 007, a game based on the James Bond film GoldenEye. Good film, I like that film. The project was led by Martin Hollis and development was conducted by an inexperienced team. Inspired by Sega's Virtual Cop, GoldenEye 007 had originally been an on-rails shooter before the team decided to expand the gameplay and turn it into a free-roaming first-person shooter. New elements such as stealth, headshot mechanics and reloading were introduced, and a brilliant split-screen multiplayer was added to the game by the end of its development. GoldenEye 007 was the first console first-person shooter developed by Rare, and it was released 2 years after the release of the film. The game received critical praise and received numerous awards. GoldenEye remained one of the best-selling games for 2 years and sold more than 8 million units worldwide. And for me, it was one of the reasons I bought a Nintendo 64, because I wanted to play that game. Rare then developed Diddy Kong Racing, their first self-published game. Absolutely brilliant game. Originally intended as a real-time strategy game involving cavemen, the game was reimagined into a racing game prior to its release in 1997. It was one of the fastest selling games at the time, as recorded by the Guinness Book of Records. I also like the fact that Diddy Kong Racing also featured protagonists from some future Rare games, including Banjo and Conker. Absolutely loved this game and I played it for hours. Let's have a quick look. Now, at the time of all this, Rare was still working on a large-scale platform game. Originally codenamed Dream Lands of Giants, it was a game featuring a young boy named Edison and pirates. The protagonist was then replaced by a bear known as Banjo, and Rare expanded the role of Kazooie the bird. The two characters were inspired by characters from Walt Disney Animation Studios films, and Rare hoped that they could appeal to a younger audience. Banjo-Kazooie was released in June 1998 to critical acclaim. Such a brilliant game. Okay, so now we're on to Jet Force Gemini, which is a 1999 third-person shooter. The game, it follows the story of three members of a galactic law enforcement team as they try to stop a horde of drones led by an insectoid called Mizar. The game features a single-player mode, where the player must explore a galaxy and save tribals, a race of survivors who have been enslaved and imprisoned by Mizar, and places strong emphasis on shooting large numbers of enemies while dodging their attacks. The game also includes a multiplayer mode, where 2 to 4 players can compete in traditional deathmatch games. Excellent. Inspired by 80s arcade games and more recent titles of the time, such as Super Metroid and Super Mario 64, Jet Force Gemini blends elements of both shoot-'em-up and action-adventure games. Works such as Aliens, Stargate and Battle of the Planets were also major influences to the game. And this game, well, it did receive generally positive reviews from critics. Praise was given to its detailed graphics and lifespan, while there was criticism targeted at its confusing controls and insistence on having to save every tribal to fully complete the game. Right, now we're on to Donkey Kong 64. It is the only Donkey Kong game to feature 3D gameplay. As the gorilla Donkey Kong, the player explores themed levels to collect items and rescue his kidnapped family members from King K. Rool, who seeks to destroy DK Isles. In the game, you complete mini-games and puzzles as 5 playable Kong characters, each with their own special abilities, to receive bananas and other collectibles. And in the multiplayer modes, up to 4 players can compete in deathmatch and last man standing games. Now, Rare began working on Donkey Kong 64 in 1997, following the completion of Donkey Kong Country 3. It was conceived as a 2.5D platformer, similar to Country, before becoming a more open-ended game, using the engine from Rare's Banjo-Kazooie. A 16-person team with many recruits from the Banjo Group finished the game in 1999. And Donkey Kong 64, well, it received acclaim and was Nintendo's top seller during the 1999 holiday season. It ultimately sold 5.27 million copies worldwide. Nice. It also won the 1999 E3 Game Critics Award for Best Platformer Game, and multiple awards and nominations from magazines. Reviewers praised the exceptional size and length, but criticised its camera controls and emphasis on item collection and backtracking. Some cited its gameplay and visual similarities to Banjo-Kazooie as a detriment. Critics said Donkey Kong 64 did not match the revolutionary impact of Donkey Kong Country, but was still among the Nintendo 64's best 3D platform games. In 1999, Nintendo signed an agreement with Disney, and they signed Rare to develop several racing and adventure games featuring Mickey Mouse. The project later became Mickey's Speedway USA and Mickey's Racing Adventure, so let's have a look at both of those games.
Mickey's Racing Adventure on Game Boy Color.
Get into it.
Upon the completion of Banjo-Kazooie's development, Hollis immediately began another project. Originally set to be a tie-in for Tomorrow Never Dies, Rare was significantly outbid by another publisher, forcing Rare to develop a new concept with new characters. With a major emphasis on lighting, the game was named Perfect Dark. Now, Hollis left Rare for Nintendo 14 months after the start of Perfect Dark's development. And at around at the same time, numerous employees left the company too and formed new studios. And with major project leads departing, a new team took over its development and diminished the role of lighting in the game, making it a more straightforward first-person shooter. And then Perfect Dark eventually resurfaced and it was released in 2000 to critical acclaim. The game sold approximately 2 million copies. Now the game, it follows Joanna Dark, an agent of the Carrington Institute Research Centre, as she attempts to stop an extraterrestrial conspiracy by rival corporation Datadyne. The game features a campaign mode where the player must complete a series of levels to progress through the story, as well as a range of multiplayer options, including a cooperative mode and traditional deathmatch settings with computer-controlled bots. And for me and most of us, this is a spiritual successor to Rare's 1997 first-person shooter GoldenEye 007. Perfect Dark shares many features with its predecessor and runs on an updated version of its game engine. Love this game, brilliant.
Look out! She's got a gun! You won't shoot me, foolish child. Don't you know who I am?
Okay, now we're on to Banjo-Tooie, which was released in 2000. This sequel to Banjo-Kazooie, it was a critical success and it outsold the first game, selling 3 million copies. Conker the Squirrel also had his own game, originally named Conker's Quest. It was later renamed 12 Tales Conker 64. However, the game was criticised for being too family friendly and too similar to Banjo-Kazooie. And as a result, the team renamed the game Conker's Bad Fur Day and it was revealed in 2000. So, Conker's Bad Fur Day, unlike Banjo-Kazooie, was intended for a mature audience and features violence, profanity and scatological humour. The game, it did receive positive reviews from critics, but it was a commercial failure, as the game was released at the end of the Nintendo 64's life cycle and was not actively promoted by Nintendo due to its crude content. After the completion of Diddy Kong Racing, another team was working on a new game known as Dinosaur Planet for the Nintendo 64. However, Nintendo Senior Managing Director Shigeru Miyamoto suggested the team redesign the game as part of the Star Fox series for Nintendo's new console, the GameCube. And unlike previous Star Fox games, Star Fox Adventures focuses on ground-based open-world exploration. The game did receive positive reviews upon its launch in 2002. However, for me, I felt Star Fox Adventures didn't quite capture the spirit of the previous Star Fox games. I mean, it's meant to be in a spaceship up in the sky fighting other spaceships, not on the ground. It's not an adventure game, it's a space fighting game, Star Fox. So I was a little bit disappointed. And I have to say, Star Fox Adventures was the only game developed by Rare for the GameCube. 2002 was certainly a year for change. Game development costs gradually increased, and Nintendo did not provide Rare with more capital, nor did they purchase the company's remaining stake. The Stampers were surprised that Nintendo did not directly acquire the studio. Rare therefore looked for potential buyers, and in early 2000 workers from Activision and Microsoft began visiting Rare with purchase offers. And according to Microsoft's Ed Fries, Nintendo, Activision and Microsoft then became embroiled in a bidding war for ownership of Rare. Rare expressed interest in Activision's offer, but Microsoft offered more money. And then on the 24th of September 2002, Microsoft purchased Rare for $375 million. Wow.
We've got great press from all over the world, and there's something I've been dying to say to them. I mean, I'm probably going to have a couple hundred interviews, I don't know, over the next few weeks, and this is just a great chance to get it all out in front of you guys. For the last 2 years, this project has just been haunted with rumors. There's been rumors and speculation. Microsoft buying Sega, Microsoft buying Vivendi, Square, you name the company, we've been accused of buying them. The latest rumor is what? Rare, that Microsoft's buying Rare. I just wanted to come up before Sandy finishes and say in front of all of you, well, it's true.
Rare became a first-party developer for Microsoft's Xbox. Character trademarks from games developed by Rare for Nintendo's consoles, such as Conker of Conker's Bad Fur Day and Banjo of the Banjo-Kazooie series, were retained by Rare. Intellectual property created by Nintendo, such as Donkey Kong and Star Fox, were retained by Nintendo. This left the Donkey Kong Racing, due for release for the GameCube, unreleased. And also 30 employees left Rare during the transition. As I said, a lot of changes in 2002. In 2003, Rare released their first Microsoft game, Grabbed by the Ghouls, a humorous action-adventure game set in a haunted mansion full of supernatural creatures. Originally intended as a free-roaming game, it was significantly streamlined in design and concept to attract a larger, more casual audience. The game received mixed reviews from critics and was considered Rare's worst and least popular game. Since Microsoft was not part of the handheld video game console market, Rare continued to develop games for Nintendo handheld consoles after the acquisition. In August 2003, Rare and Microsoft entered an agreement with THQ to publish Rare's games for the Game Boy Advance, including Saberwolf, a game based on an ultimate character, Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge, initially intended as a Game Boy Color game, and it's Mr. Pants, a puzzle game originally developed as Donkey Kong Coconut Crackers. And then in January 2005 saw the completion of this deal with the release of Banjo Pilot, previously known as Donkey Kong Pilot before the Microsoft acquisition. So let's have a look at the Game Boy Advance games. First up is Saberwolf. A mysterious stranger has shattered the fabled Saberwolf amulet, unleashing the savage Saberwolf from years of imprisonment. Once again, it's up to Saberman, explorer and treasure hunter extraordinaire, to track and recapture his nemesis. As Saberman, you'll enter a world rife with magical creatures that you can control. Use each creature's unique powers to survive traps, obstacles, and the dreaded Saberwolf. The game's combination of 2D and 3D gameplay spreads across a variety of levels here. Alright, so based on Rare's offbeat mascot, it's Mr. Pants. It's a traditional puzzle game in the Tetris sense where the challenge is to piece together specific shapes of specific colours on a flat plain field grid. The idea of the game is simple, from rectangles of larger than 3x2 to make them disappear from play. The pieces can rotate in 90-degree variations, and it is important to get these tiles into the littlest slots on the field. You can't place same colours on top of each other, but you can place other colours on top of already placed shapes to remove them from play. There are 3 variations. In Puzzle, the challenge is to remove all the shapes from play with a set amount of pieces. In Wipeout, you've got 2 minutes to remove all shapes from play with an infinite amount of pieces. And finally, in Marathon, the challenge is to constantly place and remove shapes as long as you can, trying to keep the session alive as the playfield gets eaten away from the outside in. Gruntilda is back, and it's up to Banjo and Kazooie to stop her master plan. In Banjo-Kazooie, Grunty's Revenge, you'll play as Banjo and follow him through 6 worlds rife with trials and contests. Some of the challenges you must overcome include solving puzzles, avoiding obstacles, and battling different enemies. Defeat your foes by using Banjo's array of combat moves. You can also seek help from witch doctors who transform Banjo into a mouse, a tank, and other creatures. Banjo Pilot is the 4th instalment of the Banjo-Kazooie series. Formerly known as Diddy Kong Pilot, this is the basic kart racer, having you to race characters around tracks based on the classic platformers worlds, such as Hailfire Peaks and Treasure Trove Cove. And as with all kart racers, there are numerous items across the track you can use to attack your enemies. And the game also features 4-person multiplayer using a Game Boy Advance link cable. Nice. All the 3 SNES Donkey Kong Country games were also released from the Nintendo 64 onto the GBA. Let's have a look. At E3 2004, Microsoft's Ken Lobb said that Rare had obtained Nintendo DS development kits and was working on 2 games for the Nintendo DS. And shortly afterwards, Microsoft issued a statement that the company and its studios had no plans for Nintendo DS development. However, in July 2005, Rare posted job openings for Nintendo DS development on its website and said that it was creating key DS games. Only 2 were ever released, with the first one being Diddy Kong's Racing DS, a remake of the Nintendo 64 title Diddy Kong Racing, which was released in February 2007, and the second being Viva Pinata Pocket Paradise, a life simulation game released in September 2008. And both games, well, they supported the Nintendo DS Rumble Pack. I remember that. Anyway, let's have a look at those games. Okay, so the Xbox successor Xbox 360 was released in 2005, and two of its launch games were developed by Rare, Perfect Dark Zero and Cameo Elements of Power. Zero, a prequel to the first Perfect Dark, was originally intended for the GameCube before its redesign as an Xbox 360 game. And Rare, well, it removed several features to meet the game's release deadline in 2005. Cameo Elements of Power was also intended for the GameCube. There was a new intellectual property in which the player character shapeshifts to solve puzzles. Although both Perfect Dark Zero and Cameo received generally positive reviews from critics and sold more than 1 million copies, they were both considered disappointments.
Oh no, here he comes. You look strong, but I bet I'm fast. I can't give you a discount, but all the prices are as cheap as I can make them.
Rare released Conquer Live and Reloaded, a remake of Conker's Bad Fur Day in 2005, with updated graphics and a reworked multiplayer option. Now the game did receive generally favourable reviews, but similar to Bad Fur Day, it was a commercial failure. In 2006, the company released Viva Pinata, a game involving gardening. Incorporating elements of several franchises including The Sims, Animal Crossing and Harvest Moon, it was acclaimed as innovative. The game's commercial performance was a disappointment, however, and some Rare team members questioned Microsoft Studios' large marketing budget for Gears of War and its relative neglect of Viva Pinata. On the 2nd of January 2007, Rare founders Chris and Tim Stamper left the company to pursue other opportunities, ending a 24-year involvement in developing home video games. Tim Stamper's wife continued to work for the company, and the brothers were inconspicuous in the public eye for the next decade. That's a bit sad, isn't it? And as a result, former lead designer Greg Mells became Rare's creative director and Mark Bettridge the company's studio director. On the 8th of December 2006 and the 16th of January 2007 respectively, Rare's owners Microsoft Corporation filed US and EU trademark claims on the Ultimate Play the Game name and logo. However, it's not all doom and gloom. 2007 was the same year that saw the release of Jetpack Refueled, a remake of Jetpack for the Xbox Live Arcade. In 2008, Rare unveiled work on Xbox Live Avatars Viva Pinata Trouble in Paradise, which is the next game in the Viva Pinata series, and then there was also Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts in 2008 too. Made by the core team that developed the first Banjo-Kazooie, Nuts and Bolts received significant criticism from players due to its focus on vehicle construction rather than the traditional platforming. And although generally receiving positive reviews, the company's games for Microsoft sold poorly, and Microsoft decided to restructure the studio at the end of the decade. In March 2010, Rare opened a new facility at Fasley Studios in Digbeth, Birmingham. Later that year, Microsoft confirmed that Scott Henson, a developer who had worked on the hardware and software designs of the Xbox 360 console and Kinect for the Xbox 360, replaced Mark Bettridge as studio manager and announced focus on Xbox Live Avatars. Rare also shifted their focus to Kinect. According to Henson, Kinect will be the main focus for Rare going forwards, as it's a very rich canvas. This is just the beginning of an experience that will touch millions of people, Rare's first Kinect project was Kinect Sports, which was released in November 2010. The game was originally titled Sports Star, a more complex sports simulation game. The game was streamlined into what Microsoft executive Don Matrick hoped would be the Kinect equivalent of Wii Sports. And according to a former Rare employee, the team was worried about the game during its development because of Kinect's limitations. Its reviews were average, but it was a commercial success, selling 3 million units by May 2011. And Rare and Big Park, another Microsoft studio, joined forces in development of a sequel, Kinect Sports Season 2. Let's have a look at that. Right, now we're on to the Xbox One, and the first game up was Killer Instinct. Let's have a look. Rare released Kinect Sports Rivals in 2014. The game was worked on by 150 staff members, and a new game engine was also developed for it. The game was a commercial failure, and following Microsoft's announcement that Kinect would no longer be a priority, about 15 Rare employees were laid off. Depressing times. Emulated versions of 7 Ultimate titles were later included as part of the 2015 game compilation Rare Replay for Xbox One. A new game, Sea of Thieves, a multiplayer adventure game marketed as the best game that Rare has ever made, was introduced at E3 that year. It was delayed at the following year's conference and was released on the 20th of March 2018. And this game received mixed reviews, but was a commercial success. In January 2020, Microsoft declared it as the most successful IP it released in the 8th generation, with more than 10 million players. The game was also released on the PlayStation 5, marking it as Rare's first product on the PlayStation console. And since 2018, Rare was working on a Battletoads revival for the Xbox One and Windows, which was eventually released in 2020. And as of January 2020, Rare had more than 200 employees after growing at a consistent pace for 5 years. And finally, on October the 14th, 2024, Microsoft announced that Duncan will be promoted to head of Xbox Game Studios in November to succeed the outgoing Alan Hartman, with Joe Neate and Jim Horth to succeed him as studio heads. Well, there you go. That's the story of Rare. And so, this is where our story is coming to an end. But before I go, whatever happened to those Stamper brothers? Well, a decade later, the brothers invested in Fortune Fish, a new Nottingham-based mobile game studio started by Tim Stamper's son, Joe Stamper. And while the studio is based in Nottingham, Fortune Fish's registered office is located in nearby Ashby de la Zouch, the same town where Tim and Chris founded Ashby Computers and Graphics Limited all those years ago. And Fortune Fish, well, they released a game called Croco Bongo, a rhythm-based platform game in 2017, whose art and music recalled Rare's signature Donkey Kong Country era style. So, it's not all doom and gloom, it's a happy ending. And I have to say, it's totally amazing that their story started way back in 1979, at the start of the arcade scene. They were right there, right at the beginning. And it's also very rare and very pleasing that a 1980s game developer house which survived the 90s when consoles were moving into the 16-bit and the 32-bit eras, and not to mention that Rare is still alive today. The Stamper Brothers, total legends. So, there you go, that was my video covering all the history of the Stamper Brothers, from the early days of arcade, Ash Bay Computers and Graphics Limited, Ultimate the Game, and of course, Rare. Boy, what a story, and thank you everybody for taking the time to watch this lengthy video, much appreciated. I have to say, it certainly took a lot of time to prepare and pull all this together, and it's also important for me to point out that I didn't include the entire catalogue of games, but I certainly covered the key highlights. Now, remember to please press that like button, share my video, and please leave your comments. Share your thoughts and experiences, that's what I'm really interested in, and that would be brilliant. And finally, please press that subscribe button, that would be very, very much appreciated. So, until the next time, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye bye.